My name is Nicole Rutherford. I am a biologist with NOAA's Emergency Response Division. You have to bear with me a little bit because regardless of how many times I give a talk, I still get this big slug of adrenaline, and so I get a little shaky voice. So in a couple of minutes, it'll pass, and I'll talk and speak and sound like a normal person again. So I've been with the Emergency Response Division for about 5 years now, and again, I said yesterday in my introduction, I'm a bit of a jack of all trades. So today I get to talk to you about environmental sensitivity indice maps and how they're used, or how to use them, maybe, not how they're used necessarily. So we always get this question: how can you identify and prioritize shorelines, biological resources, human use resources to protect? Because when we look at our environment around us, we've got a huge amount of things that we need to try to prioritize. And people have different viewpoints on what's important to them, right? So this is just a place to start with your environmental sensitivity indices, or short ESIs. And I say this is a place to start because, again, everyone brings a different perspective to the table. What's important to me might not be important to you. And so this kind of lays things out in a little bit more objective way in terms of what are the sensitive resources in a particular area. I also say that these are a good place to begin because they're just a piece of paper or an online database. They are no substitute for going to your local experts and finding out what's actually in the area, because things change. You know, maybe a marina closed down and it's not really there anymore, or maybe a particular bird that we were concerned about in an area no longer visits that area, or has gone extinct or something. We're not going to be concerned about it anymore. So you always should go in when you have the time, as soon as you have the time, and talk to your local experts on the ground. That's not always possible to do at the very beginning of the spill when you're wondering, what on earth are we going to do? What on earth is out there that we need to worry about? And so you can flip to this, whether it's online, which we do have online, or a paper copy, which is what we're going to use today. So, environmental indice maps. You have a couple of sets of copies on your tables that are an example of the types of maps that are created, or what they look like. And those paper copies come in a big atlas like this. We have one for most areas of the United States. California alone has 3 sets of atlases for the north, central, and southern coast. You can also access them online, and I've got the website at the end of the presentation, and it's in your notebooks on the slides. And I would also say that you can go online to actually, if you're interested in learning more about ESIs, because today we're going to do a 30,000-foot overview. We don't have time to get into the intricacies of them, but you can go online, and there are tools and exercises that you can do on your own time with the ESI maps. So I've already gone into this a little bit. ESIs are not a TV show. So this was Jordan's joke from a couple of years ago. So, CSI, ESI, right? But you can do some investigation with them. They are a ranking of shorelines based on their sensitivity to cleanup and oil. They are also contain information about human use activities and biological resources that occur in an area. And they're all displayed on these coastal maps, which again, you can have a paper copy of, you can have an electronic PDF of, or you can actually go in and use a GIS type system to look at individual layers and get more information about specific areas. So they have 3 main components. Again, shoreline type, biological resources, human use resources. So the first component that we'll talk about are shoreline classifications. And we have a ranking for those, again, based on their sensitivity to oiling and their sensitivity to cleanup activities in response to oiling. And also, as part of that sensitivity, what kind of organisms inhabit or use those particular areas. And so on this slide, we have start up here with the least sensitive habitats, exposed rocky shores, going into more sensitive habitats like sand and gravel beaches, to the most sensitive habitats, which are our marsh type areas. So for shoreline classification alone, we'll look at those, and they're based on their coastal geomorphology. What's the substrate type in the area? What's the wave action or the energy level that's influenced that coastal morphology? And build those into, again, how sensitive is a particular area. And then we'll take those and we'll group them together by habitat types. So like exposed rocky platforms, wave-cut platforms, cliffs might be or are grouped in a particular area, or a particular grouping, versus something like marsh habitats, which come in a variety of shapes and forms: freshwater, intertidal, which encompasses freshwater, brackish or estuarine, and tidal marshes. So in looking at these factors, okay, what goes into, again, the ranking itself? It's the shoreline's exposure to wave and tidal energy. It's how biologically productive or sensitive an area is. What are the substrate types in that area? Is the oil going to slide off of it, or is the oil going to penetrate down into it? How sensitive are what kind of organisms inhabit that particular substrate? What's the slope of the shoreline? How easy is it to get to clean up? How easy is it to clean up, and how easy is it to get to clean up? And then how easy is it to restore a particular area if it is in fact been oiled? So on your maps that you have on your table, and again up here, we have this legend, and it goes from less sensitive habitats, like those exposed rocky shores, to more sensitive habitats like salt and brackish water marshes. Exposed rocky shores are one of the least sensitive habitats because oil doesn't tend to stick around on those shores for very long. If oil gets on a cliffside or cliff face, it might stick there for a little bit, but the next wave that comes up and pounds against it is going to scour away a lot of that oil. There are not a lot of cracks and crevices for that oil to penetrate into. And because of the high energy environment, there's not a lot of, there is marine life that lives there, but it's not, and I shouldn't say that they're not biologically rich and diverse, but relatively speaking, they're communities that are disturbance tolerant or disturbance oriented communities. They repopulate or recolonize an area very quickly. Whereas in a salt marsh, they're low energy environments. They have very soft sediments that are hard to work in. If you've ever gone out and actually walked around in a salt marsh, you're sinking down into it. If you're out there working, you're trying to clean up oil, you're pushing that oil down into the marsh. So you're further contaminating the sediments and pushing that oil down where it can't be weathered and removed very easily. And there's a huge diversity of organisms that use salt marshes: birds, fish, terrestrial mammals. That salt marshes are very productive and biologically rich areas. So if we were looking at a GIS type version of our shoreline classification, or of our ESI maps, we could pull up a layer that showed us just the shoreline classification for a particular area. And you can see in this example that there are actually a couple of shorelines overlaid on top of one another. And you would go back to the legend and you would say, okay, well, what kind of habitats are those? But the paper copies of these have a whole lot of information all overlaid on top of them. And again, they're quick, easy reference to pull out. But if you really need to have a very specific, you might have trouble looking at this and pulling out what are the various shoreline types involved, because there's so much other stuff going on top of it when you overlay the biological and human use resources. So the second major component that are mapped on the ESI maps are biological resources. And I have to say, these are not the types of resources that are mapped on those. It's not to say that they're not important. So this is a picture actually of some sheep that were oiled. They're not oiled in the picture, but you see his respirator from an oil spill that happened off the coast of Scotland. And it was at the base of the series of the cliff, and when the waves came in, they were throwing oil up to the top of the cliff where the sheep were grazing. So his sheep got oiled, and I'm sure he was terribly upset by that. Likewise, my friend Jill would be very upset if her dog were to get oiled, or my cats, right? Which those are actually not my cats. Mine are much cuter. So then the question is, what types of resources do get mapped on the ESIs? And the species that get mapped are those that are more at risk in the event of an oil spill, and or that we have more concern about for one reason or another. And so those are things like threatened and endangered species, or species that are rare or of special concern. So, we're going to be upset. The public at large is going to be terribly upset if a humpback whale swims through a big oil slick, just like they were terribly upset during Deepwater Horizon when there were pods of dolphins swimming through emulsified oil, or sperm whales sighted in the midst of the slick. So we're concerned about those, not only from a public, charismatic megafauna aspect, but also because these species are already threatened or endangered as a result of other types of activities. Or climate change as well. We're also concerned about commercial and recreational species. Fisheries closures are a big deal. Nobody wants to eat oil-contaminated shellfish or shrimp or crabs, or pinfish don't tend to get it. That's a different subject. So we want to know what are commercial and recreational fisheries in a particular area or species. Areas of high concentration, like haul-out areas or pupping areas for pinnipeds or seals, sea lions, marine mammals type things. Bird rookeries, we want to know. If there's a bird rookery that actually, in addition, not only is a high concentration, but is a rookery of threatened species, we want to know that, and that's going to become a higher priority for protection than a place that maybe only has, 10 or 15 birds that show up on a daily basis. Because the reality is, when it comes down to it, you can't protect everything. Even though we might view them all as important and equally important, we can't protect them all. And so you have to look at where are we going to expend those resources. And that's, I guess, a double entendre, right? You expend the birds to be oiled, or you expend your boom, placing it somewhere else. And then also we look at areas where sensitive life history stages occur. And so this is a picture of eelgrass, an eelgrass bed. And eelgrass beds are very important because they act as nurseries for all sorts of juvenile fish and crabs and shrimp and whatnot. And because they act as nurseries for those animals, they attract predators to those areas. So you get a higher concentration of animals that want to eat those littler animals. And you also get a high concentration of birds. So they're sensitive habitats that we want to know are in an area that's potentially going to be oiled or is being oiled. And so, just to summarize, we could have all sorts of things on here: birds, fish, vertebrates, reptiles. If I'm down in the Gulf Coast, I might want to know if I'm in a marsh that has high use by the American alligator. And I don't want to be the one to capture the alligator if it gets oiled, but somebody's probably going to have to. Marine mammals, and then terrestrial mammals, because there are a lot of those that utilize the marsh and whatnot. Okay. So this might be kind of hard to see from the back, but this is a legend, and I actually didn't give you this particular legend with your map, because what we're going to do at the end, you don't have to have it necessarily. But you can see, we'll do a close-up, that it has all sorts of symbology on here for different plants, plants and animals that occur in a particular area. And the symbology is representative of sort of the life, at least we try to make it representative of some aspect of the life history of that particular animal. So you can see we've got diving birds, gulls and terns, raptors, shorebirds, wading birds. We've got eelgrass over here. We've got fish. So you can look at the map without the legend necessarily and be like, oh yeah, well I must be worried there's some fish that occurs in this area or some bird that I'm worried about. And so, again, this is an example of a map. You have some on your tables as well. And you can see that there are a lot of biological resources in any particular given area. We'll zoom in a little bit. And just on this small portion of that map alone, you can see that we have, shorebirds, wading birds, other types of waterfowl, dabbling ducks, say, or geese or swans or something. There are raptors, diving birds, gulls and terns. You can see that we also have some fish in the area and some eelgrass beds. You also notice, looking at these maps, that there's a little box with a number underneath. If we were to look at this number, this is not a good choice because I can't read those. I doubt you can either. Let's go to stuff. Oops. So let's say number 16. This is horrible. We're going to skip past it. But it's a picture of the data table that's on the back side of your maps. And you're going to practice with them in just a minute. If we zoom in and we look at it, what we find on that data table is information about, we see the RAR number, and so 16 was a number that was on the front of the map that I was showing you. And we can look and we can see that what species it is. In this case, it gives a bunch of species, dabbling ducks, shorebirds, wading birds. It's a big group. It will tell us, are they a state or federal species that we are threatened or endangered or of special concern? And then it'll tell you what their concentration is. Is it high, low, medium, or are they just present? If you go across the list, and I had to break it in order to put it on the slide and make it readable, you can see that it has the months of the year on here, January through December. And you can look to see, are those birds here? Well, if we look at just those 3 species that occur for number 16, dabbling ducks, shorebirds, wading birds, and we look down here and we look across, you can see that those birds are here all the time. Some of them are gone for a period of time, but there are birds there that we are concerned about all the time. And then further on, you can look to see whether there's information about, are they doing something in particular in the area? Are they nesting? Are they laying eggs? Are they breeding? Because we're concerned about those young life early life stages. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. You're talking to local experts about if the birds there, if they're actually nesting. Like, who are the local experts? Is like the fish and wildlife scientists, or the hobbyists, or?
Yeah, it might be a variety. I would certainly speak to your local, state, and federal people. So these maps were generated by talking to all of those folks. But again, when the call comes at 4 o'clock in the morning, you're going to have some scrambling around. It might be 10 hours later before it's actually identified as to who the best person would be to talk to. But yeah, it's going to be your state people that are local to that particular area. It's going to be, you might reach out to the sanctuary folks. You might include people from Audubon Society. I mean, it's just going to depend on what the reach is, and your local state person and your local federal person will have their own network of contacts that they'll reach out to for that additional information. Okay, so just some things to think about with your biological resources at risk. Remember, just because a species isn't mapped on that map doesn't mean it's not there. Again, we're focused on species that are most sensitive to or most at risk in the event of a spill. And then also, we don't know everything. Even your local person on the ground isn't going to necessarily know everything that's out there. So we don't know. Things change. There's all kinds of considerations to keep in mind. Yeah.
On that note, how often are these activated?
Not as often as we would like. I think that the cycle is something like 10 or 15 years, depending on the funding. It's not cheap to go out and touch base with all those folks, and I see Jordan wants to add to that.
Yeah, so, there's like 5 or 6 ESI maps for California, and all of them have been updated in the last 7 years, except for San Francisco.
But nation,
this one is over 30 years old, so I guess my question is, with climate change and with population density changes and those kinds of things, this doesn't seem like it'd be all that reliable.
it's a place to start at 4 o'clock in the morning. And again, you got to have some place to start. The best thing, as I said at the beginning and just a minute ago, is to talk to the people that are on the ground, local, because things do change. Yeah.
Just piggybacking on that, it's just one tool in a big toolbox, which I'll be talking about some of the other tools right after this presentation. So sort of keep that in mind. It's just a tool.
Okay. Yep.
And I heard that San Francisco Bay Area, Oakland, that whole area in there, while it doesn't get as much ship traffic as compared to LA Long Beach, it's 40% of the nation's shipping. See, that even though I think I was told recently that the San Francisco Oakland boards receive about, less than half of that it's because of the number of sensitive, environmentally sensitive areas that makes it.
Well, and you'll see when we do our exercise, which hopefully we'll get to in just about a minute and a half, the map that I chose illustrates that just the habitat itself is incredibly sensitive. And you're right, that's going to play into the considerations for spill response. So other things to keep in mind is that the boundaries are not exact. We're not able to pin those birds down in that very spot. They move around, just like the marine mammals move around, the invertebrates and the fish move around. They may be somewhere else that they're not mapped on that. The seasonality is not absolute. The birds may decide to come up in February. It was exceptionally warm down south. It's been exceptionally warm up here, whatever. And they decided to start their migration earlier rather than later, or vice versa. It was colder, and so they stayed behind for a little bit. So just because it says that it's not there in June doesn't mean that it couldn't be there. And then the other thing, too, to keep in mind is that this is all tied together. It's not just one species or one habitat that you're looking at. A multitude of other things rely upon that. And so what I have up here is an example of a herring. Here's the school of herring. If the areas that the herring spawn at get oiled, that can have impacts far beyond the population of the herring species. They're forage fish that a lot of other species, including threatened and endangered species, rely upon. And so if their population goes down, you might in fact have a direct or indirect, depending, impact on other populations, other species that are at risk. And then two, you might have an impact on commercial fisheries. Herring are in fact a commercial fishery, but if it didn't directly impact that, maybe it's going to impact the salmon fishery, right? So you got to keep in mind that it's all tied together. So these maps are a snapshot in time, and as has been pointed out, it could be a long time ago that they were put together. In our ideal world, we would update them very regularly, but we don't have the money to do that, and neither do our partners. So we do what we can. You can use them to do planning for your ACPs, looking at your response, putting your response plans together. But, when it comes down to it, again, you should always go back to the folks that are on the ground that really know what's happening in that area. So I'm going to breeze through human resources. They're mapped on here as well. We look at things like managed areas, high-use recreational and shoreline areas. If Huntington Beach is going to get oiled, you better be prepared because a lot of people are going to be terribly upset about that. And it's not necessarily because it's a sensitive habitat. Oil is in fact very easy, relatively speaking, to clean out the sand beaches, but your public is going to be very interested in what's happening. Commercial and recreational fishing, mentioned already. Historical and cultural sites, this is Alcatraz Island, it gets oiled. Got issues in terms of cultural resources that you need to consult on. And you may have restrictions in what you can clean up. We ran into that down at Deepwater Horizon with some historic forts that got severely oiled, and 3 years later, they still haven't been cleaned because of the cultural use restrictions. And access points that are important for us as responders. Where are your boat ramps? Where are your marinas? Where are the major roads? How am I going to get in and out? And then, like for the biology and like for the shoreline, there is a key that goes along with that. And this symbology is consistent across the maps, whether you look at a map for San Francisco Bay or you look at a map for Chesapeake Bay versus Alaska. So now we're going to do our exercise. There's not enough maps for each person, but there are enough maps that every couple of people can look together. And what I want you to do is to look in the north of the bay, and I want you to go around the bay and record the shorelines, the types of shorelines that you see there. And I'll give you just a couple minutes.
Yeah, no, that wasn't playing out.
Unified together, and people making decisions. We've got this much food, this much place. Something happens, and then one of these leaks out. I mean, it would just be.
From the unified command perspective, they're making their decision on this.
Oh, right, but I mean, but the media reporters,
Just stick to the plan. Basically, noise filters.
Okay, who needs more time?
No way you spike numbers.
Hello? Folks, who needs more time? Show of hands. Okay, so it looks like you guys are ready. So just in general, what kind of shorelines do you see as most predominant in Suisun Bay? I heard salt marshes. What else? Sheltered tidal flats.
the most sensitive.
And those are the most sensitive habitats. And if you look around the bay, almost the entire shoreline are salt marshes or sheltered tidal flats. You've got a few areas that have some riprap in there, a few solid man-made structures, but not very many. So, and as someone just said, the salt marshes and sheltered tidal flats are among the most sensitive habitats. So you really don't want an oil spill to happen out here. But it likely will. Okay, so Jordan assures me that we have a couple more minutes, so we'll go to the next piece of this, which is using the same map. I didn't give you the legend, so I'll put it up here on the map, but the symbology is, pretty straightforward. Find 2 biological resources at risk, and then using the number that's associated with them, flip to the back and tell me what they are and whether we need to be really concerned about them. Are they high concentration? Are they a threatened or endangered species? Are they there, let's say, if the spill happened today?
So you would take
I meant to, and I got distracted. Nancy? And so just to reiterate, your task is to identify 2 biological resources. So what kind of bird, marine mammals, terrestrial mammals, whatever, and then look at the box the number associated with them. Flip to the back and tell me, are we really concerned about them? Is there a high concentration? Are they there now? If we had a spill today, are they threatened or endangered? One more minute. Okay, folks, I'm going to cut you off, despite the fun with the ESIs. I know this was very short. Can someone shout out one species that's in the bay at this time of the year?
Saltwater harvest mouse.
Oh, okay. This table first. Shout it out. I didn't hear what he said, but whatever. Okay. No, sorry. Sorry, no, joking. Is it now? It's here now. Is it a species that we're concerned is federally threatened or state threatened or endangered?
It's endangered.
Okay, so we're going to be very concerned about something happening to that organism, right? Okay. How about this table they shouted out at the back where Tim's at?
Number 106 on the resources risk list, saltwater harvest mouse. It is a mouse that is a feeding species present here.
Okay, so saltwater harvest mouse. And it is a threatened species that we are going to be concerned about. People say, well, what's the big deal? It's just a mouse. Well, don't forget, everything's connected, right? We're concerned about that. Okay, so I'm out of time. If you want to have more fun with the SI maps, you can go to the website, which is on the slides in your booklet, response.restoration.noaa.gov/ESIs. You can actually download several exercises if you want to step through them. There's an ESI viewer so that you can turn layers on and off in that. And then the last thing that I want to mention in regards to online stuff is that the ESI maps are actually in IRMA. And so you can go into IRMA and you have all the query. You can do all the querying that you would do in a Esri GIS version of this. So IRMA is a good resource for your ESI maps. And that was came from the state to plug that, not from NOAA. Okay, so then just keep in mind there's a huge amount of information available on these maps. You need to have the key or the legend to really get the most out of the maps that you can. But they're only a snapshot in time. You got to talk to your local experts. All right, I'm all done.